Hi guys, for this video I want to go over some of my favorite decks in Edison. I know some of you guys only see me as more of like a deck list provider and some of the gameplay provider, and more or less like a personality. For those of you guys caring about what my personalities are like, this is the video for you. So I'm going to go over some of my favorite decks in Edison, and I'm going to start right away. You might be shocked that one of my favorite decks in Edison is actually Blackwings, and it's going to be the pure one. Blackwings is one of those decks where even though it's highly overplayed and highly oversaturated, my thought process is there's a reason why it's really popular, and it's not because the deck is stupid broken. It actually has a lot of play lines, and it has one of the best lines in Edison, in my opinion. It's because Blizzard opens up so many different type of plays where you can go into either a level 5 synchro, namely Catastor and Android, and depending on which situation you're in, will dictate what play lines you'll make. Sometimes when you'll have a Clute out on the board, or you'll use a Clute during the damage step, he'll often be in the graveyard, and by having it in the graveyard, you have to know if you summon a Blizzard into a Kalut, and if you make a android as a result of the blizzard, you'll end up with two Blackwings in the graveyard and not three. But if you used Kalut during the damage step, it usually signifies that you have lost the first Blackwing that you had that you Kalut with. So that puts you at three darks, and sometimes it's often really good to play Android in that situation where you haven't drawn a Dark Arm yet, but you kind of suspect that you might draw a Dark Arm later on in the game if you can draw into an Allure of Darkness. So that's why I really like Black Wings, because sometimes making specific synchros, even though it seems correct at the time, actually isn't correct in the future. So I like that part about Blackwings where you kind of play the deck where you kind of have to predict what's going to happen in the future according to your deck, and this is one of the decks that really pays off really well if you play the deck correctly. You can also go into the more traditional lines where you end on a Goyo Guardian or Brionac. Sometimes Brionac would be really good if you open up Whirlwind with Blizzard and you search a value, and you want to have the value in the graveyard. You can go into Brionac and then discard the value. This way, whenever you have other Blizzard plays where you go into the Armwing, you'll have you'll have a value in the graveyard along with the Armwing, assuming it gets destroyed or sent off to the graveyard somehow. You'll be able to make an Armor Master. So that's one of my favorite cards in Blackwings is Blizzard, because it has one of the most versatile play lines for just having one card. So yeah, that's what I really like about Blizzard. On top of that, sometimes you don't want to synchro summon. Sometimes you end up on a board where you have a Blizzard and you special summon a Blackwing in defense mode, and then that kind of enables your Icarus attack to be live. And that Icarus attack is going to generate a +1 by taking two cards out of your opponent while you wasted only one card, because Blizzard is a +1. But if you're tributing off the Blackwing that you got off of the Blizzard, you can essentially just make Icarus attack a +1 is what I'm trying to get at. Now you don't have to tribute the monster that you revive with Icarus attack. You can actually just tribute off Blizzard sometimes. Sometimes you can go declare an attack with a Blizzard, and then if they activate like a defensive trap, you can just chain Icarus and then tribute off the Blizzard, and now you've really put yourself in a really good spot because your declaration of attack with the defensive trap wastes that defensive trap, and then the Icarus attack is going to take out two more cards. So I really love the Blizzard lines usually in Blackwings, and that's why Blackwings is one of my favorite decks in Edison. And obviously there's the Whirlwind lines with Shura, where if you grab a Gale off of the search, you can special the Gale half an attack of a monster on the field, and then most likely it's going to be a Caius. And then you're going to use Shura to run over the Caius. And then Gale, and then with Shura's effect, you're going to be able to special summon a value from the deck. And then this is going to open up a playline where you end on Stardust, and you're going to have a Silverwind Ascendant next to him. It's one of my favorite plays back in the day when Edison was around. I actually played during that time. That is one of the coolest plays, in my opinion, in Blackwings, and I still love it to this day. Additionally, Shura makes Kalut a +1, where Other decks can't utilize hand traps the same way. If you play a light deck and you have an Honest often just trades with the monster that attacks over the light monster that you have. But with Blackwings, Shura makes Collude a +1. And that's what I really like about that. When you destroy a monster by battle, the Collude in your hand turns into a Vayu or a Gale or another Collude. The reason why it's a +1 is because you're able to take out an opponent's monster during their turn. So that really generates a lot of different play lines, and that allows you to just have the Icarus live where you didn't have it live before. Um, where you had Ashura give you a +1, that value that you get off Ashura can be tributed off with Icarus attack during the end phase blow up back row. So there's a lot of different lines in Blackwings, and Blackwings is one of those few decks that is able to do board control very, very well. Oh yeah, but that's enough a lot about the best lines in Edison. There's another reason why Blackwings is very cool, is that it does so much, right? It's able to special summon from the hand. It's able to search cards out of the deck and generate +1s. It's able to revive cards from the graveyard using Blizzard. It's able to use Vayu's effect to literally banish itself to bring out a if you fuse itself with Sirocco, Armwing, or Armor Master, it makes a different bird depending on what you want to bring out. But yeah, it's really difficult to side deck against those decks because let's say you want to shut off the Icarus attack playline. Well, if they do side Mask Restrict, most likely they won't. You always have the Blizzard playlines and the Gale special summon and the Boros special summons to do damage. That includes your Collude as well. So if you have Restrict in your side deck, well now you have to consider, is it really worth it to side something like Mask Restrict to shut off one trap card? And oftentimes the answer is no. Edison has evolved over time and it's gotten to the point where you can just play Concentrate Light against Blackwings. But Blackwing is one of the most balanced deck in the game because it plays 20 monsters and they play 8 to 10 spells and 10 traps, 10 to 12 traps. And that means that if you try to shut off the monster line in the Blackwing deck, they'll often use their spell or trap line to ensure that Consecrate Light gets destroyed off the field. So cards like Book of Moon is one of the outs that you can use against Consecrate Light, and Icarus Attack being another one, assuming that you don't mind taking a loss with the Icarus Attack. And then another card that you can use is Brain Control, where you can just sacrifice the Consecrated Light off the Brain Control for Sirocco, because the ruling is you can sacrifice Consecrated Light for Sirocco, even though Sirocco is a dark monster. But yeah, I'm sure you guys already know that one. So it makes it really difficult to side deck against Blackwings, and that's why I think Blackwings is one of my favorite decks. Another reason, here's an example deck list of what I mean by a balanced meta deck list. So if you look at the most recent Blackwing that topped by Obito95 in the Beast Mode series, 11, he has exactly 20 monsters in his deck. And if you look at like old rule books from Yu-Gi-Oh when it was first designed, and you read the tips on how to build decks, oftentimes those rule book will try to encourage players to try to play 20 monsters, 10 spells, and 10 traps because that was the ratio in which the creators of the game wanted the players to have in order to ensure that they had a lot of success in the tournament. And I wholeheartedly agree with that statement because you don't know what matchups you're going to play throughout your tournament experience in Edison. You want to be able to have answers in your deck and not have one side deck ruin your entire game plan, such as Consecrated Light. When you have a balanced deck, you have so many ways to out Consecrated Light. And I'm looking at this deck list, it even main decks a deck Devastation Virus. So if you set Sirocco under a Consecrated Light and you set deck Devastation Virus, well, now you have an out to Consecrated Light. And that's really cool about the one thing that's cool about Blackwings. If you look at other decks where other decks utilize very few monster counts, such as Diva Hero Beat, granted, you do have E-Emergency Call to count as the monsters, but other cards such as Miracle Fusion relies heavily on the fact that you have to set up your graveyard in order to make it live. So what I mean by this is sometimes you don't have a monster and all you have is Miracle Fusions in your hand, and you're unable to resolve a Strato Summon and bring out the Alias. When that happens, guess what? One Solemn Judgment ruins your entire game plan. One Divine Wrath, one Pulling the Rug. All of that ruins your game plan when you can't draw another monster. And vice versa. If you were to play this deck, sometimes they don't even have the Pulling the Rugs or the Solemn Judgment or the Divine Wrath. Sometimes you just open all spells and traps. And there in Edison, that is not a good sign of a good deck. If you open up all spells and traps, your turns are going to be setting 4 or 5, depending on what you have, and then just passing. And hopefully, your opponent just doesn't draw Heavy Storm or out your whole entire back row to kill you. And oftentimes, I don't really like strategies like that, where you just lose because the 5 cards or the 6 cards you draw are all spells and traps. Or sometimes, if you're playing a monster heavy deck, such as the one on the left and the right, with fairies and hero frogs, sometimes you draw all monsters. I know that if I were to play any of these two decks on the left and right, if I were to run into cards like Fossil Dyna, for example, it's going to be really hard for me to play the game, especially if the Fossil Dyna is backed up with defensive trap cards. So I rely heavily on my spells and traps to ensure that all my monsters go through. And if I'm floodgated by any means, by any of the side decks, well, it's going to be really, really difficult for me to come back in the game. Now, granted, I can summon a monster every turn, but if I have 5 monsters in my hand and I'm being floodgated by a Fossil Dyna, it's very difficult for me to summon a monster and try to run over it when the Fossil Dyna player can simply just keep drawing new spells and traps every turn to set, along with the Fossil Dyna, to deal with any incoming threats. And that doesn't count the fact that they can normal summon additional monsters in order to ensure that your life points gets depleted. So that's one of the weaknesses of playing a lot of monsters in your deck, is that any sort of side deck card that is in the game really makes it so that, or any sort of floodgate monster makes it really difficult for you to win the game, which is why I prefer a deck like Blackwing, where I have a lot of different options to me available at the time that the floodgate monster comes down. So if Fossil Dyna comes down and I'm playing Blackwings, well, I have trap cards and have spell cards to deal with Fossil Dyna, and I'm not incredibly blown out just because they keep using trap cards underneath the Fossil Dyna. So that's like my gripe with other decks, but Blackwings will never fail that because it's balanced. So another reason why I like Blackwings is it's one of the few decks in Edison that pierces. Not a lot of decks pierces, even though Quick Draw Synchron is not a very popular deck. The fact that it is a deck that people can still play, and there's decks that you rely on special summoning Treeborn Frog to stall out the turns or Battle Fader. The fact that Blackwings have a way to pierce damage makes it so that control decks like that don't have an advantage over Blackwings. In fact, that if you do decide to special summon Battle Fader, you're going to have to find a way to tribute it off the board. Otherwise, if it stays on the board, well, these Boras and these Armwings are going to be doing a major amount of damage backed up with a Colute. And I find that really, really cool because oftentimes a control deck should not be in the format if it extends the game to a long period of time and making the tournaments really last longer as a result. Armwing or Blackwings existing allows the meta to be more faster so that players that play slow and play control decks can just speed up the process, can just end the game faster with Blackwings being around. They play really well under Oppression. So Oppression is one of those cards where some decks just auto lose to it. One of the biggest weaknesses of modern format decks is that it relies heavily on special summoning. And if Oppressions were around, I'm pretty sure Oppression would just make it so that the game becomes unhealthy because every deck special summons in Modern. In Edison, there was a handful of decks that loved to special summon. Decks like Quick Draw Dandy Warrior are one of the decks that love to special summon. And any deck that likes to synchro summon, such as zombies. Oppression just pretty much murks the deck because they're unable to special summon, so they can't bring out their boss monsters. However, Blackwings, you have Kalut that backs up Shura. You have Vayu that you can activate multiple times under Oppression until it resolves and banish itself as a resolved effect. These are all reasons why Blackwing is a really cool deck because you can have the best floodgate in all of Yu-Gi-Oh history, and you get to special summon still. Like that is impressive, and you don't even have to draw an out to out your own oppression. Now, oftentimes you will heavy storm yourself, but other times you're chilling. You have an 1800 beat stick on the field, sometimes 2000 if you have a Sirocco, and sometimes 3200 attack with Kalu. Granted, it's only going to be one turn, but that's fine. This deck plays really balancedly, and I think even though it gets all the hate that it does for being overplayed, I still think that it's one of the best decks to ever have existed in Yu-Gi-Oh history. Coming in at number 3, one of my favorite decks in all of Edison is Synchro. And I think this is one of the most criminally underplayed deck. It's one of those decks where it uses hybrid engines where you're using Resocat along with Gravekeeper Spy. Gravekeeper Spy is one of those really good cards in this deck because one, it's a spellcaster and it's a dark monster. So having those two attributes about this card makes it so that this deck is really good because you can utilize cards like Caius to generate a +1 after chipping off the Gravekeeper Spy. So in technicality, you can just flip the Spy, special summon a Descendant, get a +1. Use that Descendant to trade the Gravekeeper Spy to pop a back row. That's going to generate you a +1 because generally the same card, which is Spy, allowing you to take cards away from your opponent, tribute off that Descendant for Caius, and then generate another +1 by taking out a card from your opponent's side. When Caius ever goes to the graveyard, now you have 3 darks in the grave, and then you can special summon Dark Arm. So you can see the flow chart here where you're generating a ton of +1s. And if you don't have the Caius or the Dark Arm, you can go into the Rescue Cat line where normal summon the Rescue Cat, special summon the 2 Arabellums, attack directly with both the Arabellums, generating +1s each. Main phase 2, you can Synchro summon the Arabellum with the Descendant to make an Arcanite Magician, and then pop 2 more back row. If they can't deal with the Arcanite Magician, then they can't set any defensive back row, such as Deep Prison and Mirror Force, or even Torrential, because Arcanite Magician will just clear it. And you can also use the Arabellum if you do have another monster on the board to synchro summon with another level 4 and then end on another synchro. And this whole process will give you at least 5 monsters in the graveyard. And that'll allow you to activate Pot of Avarice to generate another +1. So you can see that Gravekeeper Spy in this deck generates a huge play line in tandem with either the Caius or the Rescue Cat to generate tons of play. If you draw the Summoner Monk can actually just get the Rescue Cat if you have another spell in your hand. So I think this is one of the most criminally underplayed deck in competitive Edison, and you can sort of see why it's underplayed because it uses a hybrid engine of dark monsters and dark and earth monsters to do this play line. I want to see Synchro Cat develop into a more consistent build in future formats of Edison. Also, here's an example deck list to show you what I mean. This is an older list of Synchrocat where they play Cyber Dragon. The Cyber Dragon is really good in this deck because A, you have the ability to go into level 8 Synchro with any Arabellum, and B, it's also a machine monster that you can contact fusion with machine monsters, and also it's a light monster for Chaos Sorcerer in this deck, and I love Chaos Sorcerer in most decks because it's able to be played on main phase 2 to banish any monster afterwards. And then thirdly, it's also a beater. It's a 2100 beater that you can play, and so this deck can really utilize the Cyber Dragon. And we already see the Dark Arm here because of the Spies, and then we have the Descendant. So there's a lot of playlines in here, and the Avarice here makes the deck so you can kind of see the flow of the deck. It even plays a balanced deck list of 20 monsters, even 12 spells, and also 8 traps. The traps you'll most likely see because you're going to be using Avarice to recycle the monsters, but you're also going to be able to draw 2, and because the ratios are set up to be that way, you're going to be able to draw into the trap cards to defend your monsters. So ideally, you're going to be having monsters out there, especially a Stardust, to back up these back rows. So I really like this deck list right here. Even though it's a really old deck list, it's still good. And then you're gonna have a lot of turn plays where you're, especially if you're going first, you're gonna be either sending a Spy or a Hamster, and then that flipped Hamster or a flipped or Raikou will generate you a lot of advantage as a result. You can also flip a Raikou and also make a Gothams, I believe, if the hamster still survives, because that's the 4, 3, and 2. You can make a Mistworm play with the hamster, Airbellum, and the Raikou, assuming it all sticks. You can also make a level 5 Synchro with the Raikou and the Airbellum. There's just a lot of different Synchros you have access to just because you're one Rescue Cat. So I definitely like this aspect of the deck. And you also have the Summoner Monk play too. And that's going to go into my next slide here. It's one of the best Cold Wave decks in my opinion because Summoner Monks generates such a huge playline with another spell in your hand. So if for those of you guys who don't know, you can go activate Cold Wave, normal summon the Summoner Monk, discard a spell to get the Rescue Cat. And the Rescue Cat tributes itself to make 2 Arabellums. And then if there's no monsters, both those Arabellums can go in for damage because the back row is shut off with Cold Wave. And then you can Synchro summon both the Arcanite and the Arabellum for a Arcanite Magician, and then pop the two remaining back rows, even though they're stunned. And the reason why you want to pop the back rows in main phase 2 is because you want to play around Gores. So it does have the skill ceiling aspect of this deck where if you play correctly, you can get rewarded really well. All right, coming at number two is going to be Deep Sea Diva. Deep Sea Diva is one of those decks that you can kind of tell the pattern of with me is I love combo decks. Combo decks, even though it's not very much a big thing in Edison, where you don't pop off like crazy like it is in Modern, combo decks in Edison are more like tamed, where the turns don't take too long, especially if you know what you're doing. You're able to just capitalize on certain plays, and then the certain play lines are really cool. So we're going to focus on Diva Zombies here. Diva Zombies is a really cool deck. Here are the example deck lists of Diva Zombies. Very, very similar to each other. I don't know how DD Crow has gotten into the format or has crept into the Diva Zombie list. Being able to put a third Dark in the graveyard is probably the only reason I would see it being used. So on the left we see a Cyber Dragon. That's generally not played in the deck, but I can see it being used to make a level 7 Synchro, as it is kind of difficult to make the level 7 Synchro. But I definitely love these deck lists because it's kind of balanced as in some ways because it is playing 21 monsters, but the monsters are searchable because of the recruiters and also the Goblin Zombie. So it's like you're playing 20 monsters, but not really. It also plays about what is this? 7 spells and traps and a lot of traps. I mean, it plays 7 spells here and a lot of traps. So very kind of balanced. Even though you can get shut off by oppression in this deck, you can kind of tell that these deck lists have main deck outs to oppression, like Dust Tornado being one of them, and also on this one you have the Phoenix Wind Blast. So there's definitely outs to oppression in this deck, so it doesn't auto lose that floodgate. You also have the Heavy Storm and the MST on both deck lists, so you're able to at least be able to push after you take out the floodgate cards. So after you do that, you have spell cards like Book of Life to just capitalize on back rows that are being removed. So you definitely have a lot of ways to be able to push past a back row heavy deck. We have the extra deck here where it's pretty much generalized here. I definitely love the fact that it has a diversity of different cards you can go into the extra deck. It even plays the Colossal Fighter Armory Arm, but it has the Dark End, it has the Goyo Guardian line. It basically uses level 6, level 8s, and even level 7s and 4s for some extreme situations. But it definitely has a lot of different play lines, and that's what I really love about Diva Zombies. So Diva Zombies is one of those decks where it has the ability to reanimate itself. In Edison format, there's typically some decks that can do that, but generally Zombies is the only deck that reuses its monsters from this graveyard, and these are the example cards that what I mean by that. Mizuki is able to generate you a zombie from the graveyard just by simply by banishing it, and it's not very much a level restriction. You can revive any zombie, and that's including Book of Life as well. Those two cards are there can revive a it can revive a Revive King Hades from the graveyard if it ever gets sent to the graveyard by Synchro Summon or because it gets destroyed by battle. Those are two ways you can revive King at spell speed 1 without using up an opportunity cost such as Call of Haunted. Call of Haunted, you do have to wait a whole turn before you can activate it. So you have to give up your turn and then flip it. Whereas Book of Life and Mizuki, you can just do it right away. And then you also have Zombie Master, being able to revive a Goblin Zombie or a Spirit Reaper from the graveyard, or even a Pyramid Turtle from the graveyard, is really key in a lot of situations. And then you have Plague Spreader Zombie that brings itself back. We all know how good Plague Spreader Zombie is, but in Zombies, it's definitely used even better than any other deck because it doesn't. You don't have to use the top deck effect to bring itself out from the graveyard. You can just simply revive it from using Zombie Master, Mizuki, and Book of Life. So because of that, Plague Spreader Zombie is going to be coming out of the graveyard at least 3 times in some combo lines, and I really like that about Plague Spreader Zombie. Then there's yeah, so I'm gonna go over some of the play lines here. This is the most basic one where you have a Goblin Zombie out and a Deep Sea Diva. By Synchro summoning a Deep Sea Diva with a Goblin Zombie, you can search for the Mizuki to make the Bryanak, And then if they don't have bottomless, you can just discard them. You can discard a Mizuki off the Brinac, and then revive the Goblin Zombie using Mizuki to special summon the Goblin Zombie. And with the second Diva that you brought out, you can Synchro summon into a level 6 Synchro, which is you can go into Goyo Guardian, and then using that Goblin Zombie that you just used to make the Goyo Guardian, you can search for Plague Spreader Zombie, use Brinax effect, discard the Plague Spreader Zombie, and then if you have a Book of Life or you want to top deck for a Plague Spreader Zombie, you can do so on main phase 2 and make a Stardust and back that up with the trap card. And then you can already see that you can already see from the example deck list, just to remind you guys, that they have a lot of trap cards, so you can back up the Stardust with the trap card, and then you can end up with a really cool board, as well as being able to protect your back row, protect your monsters with Stardust. And your back row, so that you can have another turn to essentially just kill them. That's the idea behind this deck, and I really love that zombies is able to do that. And I think zombies can evolve over time to play around the mind control and the brain control, in case they steal the Stardust and then use Heavy Storm. I think there are ways around that where if you have a really good back row to back up with Stardust, even a brain control and a mind control is unable to stop the board. Yeah, so that's kind of the idea of zombies, is that it's a very balanced deck list. The side decks is very compatible with it, where you can just side deck into trap cards and then have your combo line with also the traps as well. So that's what I really like about Diva Zombies. Um, and then this is the only deck in the game where they can consistently bring out Revive King Hades, and it's one of the most unique. This is one of the most unique synchro monsters because it gives all your zombie monsters, including itself, the ability to negate the effects of monsters that it destroys in battle. So all the battle recruiters, all of the Sangan effects, um, all of the treeborn effects in Vayu and volcanic shells, even if it destroys those monsters by battle, it was unable to use its effect in the graveyard. So it really lives up to the name of Revive King Hades, being the king of the underworld and pretty much not allowing certain effects to activate if it gets destroyed by zombie monsters. So yeah, and not to mention it's a really cool artwork, and that's what I really love about these zombies. All right, now we're gonna go over my favorite deck in all of Edison, and it's going to be Chaos Fairies. So I like the fact that this deck has came into the format because one, you get to play Archlar Christia, which is one of my most favorite monsters in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Because one, Archlar Christia is able to retrieve a fairy when it is special summoned when there's four fairies in the graveyard. And I love that people in Edison have found that you can just crash all of the Shining Angels in, and then make the Nova Summoner, and then crash that card in, and then bring out an Honest or whatever. And then now you have four fairies, and now you have Christia. And that alone makes the deck Chaos Fairies, because now you can just incorporate the fairy engine with the dark package in Edison, and we all know how great the dark package is. And we get to play two of my other favorite cards in the game in Edison, and that's Chaos Sorcerer and Caius. I know that's a pretty generic answer for an Edison player, but there's no way around it. Like, Chaos Sorcerer is very criminally underplayed in Edison, and that's because Chaos Sorcerer is only at one in this format. So the any opportunity to play Chaos Sorcerer in a deck is going to be one of my top favorite picks for a deck, because Chaos Sorcerer is a level 6 dark monster that can banish in the main phase 2 and then use himself as a monster with a tuner, a level 2 tuner, in which this deck plays 3 of. If you play Plague Spreader Zombie, that's 4, and you can make a Darkened Dragon and then send off more cards. I think that's one of my most favorite lines in all of Edison. If you do play later formats of Edison, or you do play later formats of retro formats, you can summon the Glow Bulb and then make level 7, but that's besides the point. Um, and then, so this in tandem with Caius, it just makes the deck awesome, because Caius is one of the best monsters in Edison, because it's generic and it's also a level 6 dark monster that can literally deal with any synchro monster on the board and inflict burn damage. So yeah, so being those three as my favorite cards in Edison, this deck can play all of them, and it can also play Dark Arm Dragon. And Dark Arm Dragon, even though it's a really cool effect, being able to destroy 3 cards on the field, up to 3 cards on the field when it comes out, and even though it's not one of my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh monsters, it is one of the most best Yu-Gi-Oh monsters to be ever printed, and this deck can utilize all 4 of them effectively. And I love that about Chaos Fairies is because you can use all of the best Yu-Gi-Oh monsters in Edison and then cram it all into one deck. And I love that it has the boss monster capabilities. You have multiple boss monsters. Your opponent just never knows whether to decide Light Imprisoning Mirror or Shadow Imprisoning Mirror because you're using both strategies. So I love that about that. And they get to play one of the best hand traps in all of Edison, even in all of modern format, even because at some point in time, even Drytron was using this deck. And if you guys don't know what Drytron is, it's a fairy deck. It was able to search for this card from the deck and then utilize it, and it destroys monsters. It negates and destroys monsters even if you control monsters. And like if you guys don't know, there's Cyframe Gear Gamma, which is a card that's similar to Herald of Orange Light, but you have to have no monsters to use it. And though it is a 1-for-1, this is a 2-for-1 often. But putting a fairy in the graveyard using Herald of Orange Light is not a big deal because you can just retrieve that fairy using Archlord Christia. And I love that about Herald because it adds to the consistency of Archlord Christia by putting fairies in the graveyard. And then, yeah, and it's also a tuner. Like, being a tuner in this in a as a hand trap is really useful, and also being a light monster also allows you to access cards like Ancient Sacred Wyvern, which requires a light tuner, and it also allows you to access all the level 8 synchros if you have a level 6 monster on the field, which you will because you have Caius, Chaos Sorcerer, and even Malicious if you do play some variants of Chaos Fairy that uses Malicious, which I'm trying to cook as well. I'm definitely cooking up a new Chaos Fairy line where I use Malicious as well. And so if you can utilize Malicious along with the level 2 tuner, you can make level 8 synchros really consistently. And I definitely love the fact that you have the option to use this hand trap in Chaos Fairies. Now, even though Chaos Fairies does generally use a very high monster line where you're playing a lot of monsters, I don't count Herald of Orange Light as just a monster. It's also a trap card that can't be interacted with using MST and Heavy Storm because it stays in your hand. And this being able to negate any monster effects and destroying it is like a Divine Wrath in your hand, although not quite like Divine Wrath because it's not a counter spell speed 3 counter trap. It's still a form of interruption on your opponent's turn, or even your turn, because you reduce the opportunity cost because all you have to do is activate it and discard it from your hand, and you don't have to wait a whole turn like a trap card would. So definitely a reason why I love Chaos Fairies is because you can utilize Herald of Orange Light, and there's multiple applications for Herald of Orange Light depending on which situation. It's like a Swiss Army knife. Depending on what situation you're in, if you don't have another fairy in your hand, it becomes a tuner that you can utilize to synchro summon into a bigger monster, and that's what I really love about it. And not to mention that the artwork is so sick. Like you have like a fiery background, and you have this like you have basically this Firestone equivalent in Pokemon attached in the harness, so you can kind of tell that this deck is ready to go hard when it does resolve, and it does. It often does change the tide of the game, often, especially against certain decks that like to pop off, and this is one of those decks that is basically able to stop decks that like to use FTK strategies and FTK strategies where you're utilizing Whitestone Legend, Debris Dragon, whatever it is, Dragon Turbo, Norellis. This card alone makes it so that you can just interact with those cards without utilizing your trap cards. And then one of the other reasons why I really love this deck is that it plays battle recruiters, and it plays one of the best ones in Edison, which is Shining Angel and Tomato. Nova Summoner, it's an alright card because it only gets fairies, and the fairy lines are generally pretty limited, but the Shining Angel lines for Battle Recruiter, you can access cards like Cyber Valley, DD Warrior Lady, D Alchemist. All those cards are really good cards that you can get off of Shining Angel, and not to mention Shining Angel can get itself and also Nova Summoner. So it's a very good Battle Recruiter, and Battle Recruiters just make Edison worth playing because there's not cards like Scrap Dragon, Trishula, and Tangle Plant that can just deal with Battle Recruiters, and Battle Recruiters have just definitely have lost a lot of power in those formats because of those Synchro monsters being in the format. But you can also argue that Caius is a way to out Battle Recruiters. It's just that Caius is a one-time thing, whereas Scrap Dragon and Trishula, well, Trishula is only a one-time thing as well, but where you have Scrap Dragon and and reenact being used more extensively in other formats. In this format, Brionac, you just kind of have to like it does come out, but it's only come out in certain decks. But I digress. Recruiters is what makes Edison really fun to use, and having the play lines with Tomato is also good too because you can go into Sangan, you can go into Spirit Reaper, you can go into Malicious, you can go to Gale. Like these are really good battle recruiters, and this deck gets to play both of them, in my opinion. Some variants of Chaos Fairy, granted, does not play Mystic Tomato, and I think that's incorrect. I think Tomato is really good, especially if you're calling your deck a Chaos deck that uses Chaos Sorcerer and Dark Arm Dragon. If you utilize those two cards as boss monsters, you definitely have to use Mystic Tomato because it allows you to put three darks in the graveyard. It allows you to even put a dark in the graveyard at all. And if you're playing, in my deck profile, I've already mentioned this, if you're playing Battle Fader as your only dark and Caius as your only dark, sometimes Caius doesn't come down. And if you use Battle Fader never hits the graveyard because when it does get removed out the field, it gets banished and it doesn't go into the graveyard, and then you have to find another way to put a dark in the graveyard, and so that makes it so that Chaos Fairies has to find another way to put a dark in the graveyard to be called Chaos Fairies. So yeah, and then I've incorporated the zombie line, and I'm going to be cooking up a different line where I get to play Chaos Fairies again, but using different engines. But yeah, and another reason why I love this deck is it's able to use return from the different dimension really, really well because you're able to generate a lot of things in the banished because you're using Dark Arm Dragon. You're going to be using, you're going to get bottomless often because you're summoning Caius. Caius often gets bottomless. You're going to be able to utilize Dark Arm Dragon to remove three darks from the graveyard. You're going to be using Play Spreader Zombie. It's going to be banished. And some variants of Chaos Fairies where you're playing Dimensional Alchemist and you're playing a monster heavy deck, Dimensional Alchemist is also going to be putting cards in the graveyard or putting cards in the banish as well. And so it makes return really good, and it makes it really useful if you somehow get Christia in the banish. Um, if you get Christia in the banish, you can just revive, you can bring back the Christia with return, and then you have this really amazing turn where you can just lock out all the defensive hand traps such as Gores, Tragodia, and Battle Fader with Return to the Different Dimension. And then Return just opens up a lot more combos, and I just love the fact that this deck can play it really well. And then there's nothing more scarier than staring down an Archer Christia with a Brionac and a Dark Arm, and then them hitting your face for what is it, 7,900 damage, putting you below brain control. I think this is a really scary board to deal with, and even if you're playing a deck that's slower where it relies on monsters to be set, well, forget about winning because these even Dark Arm and Brionac together just deals with sets really well. And then if you set a defensive back row such as Deep Prison and Mirror Force, Dark Arm can deal with that in the next turn. Dark Arm and Brionac can deal with that in the next turn. So there's really nothing scarier than these three board, and it's such a beautiful board because you have the intertwinicity of dark and light, and you have Archer Christia who belongs on the light side, granting its assistance to the dark package. And I just love the fact that Chaos is a really cool engine in Edison and that it's actually viable. I'm waiting for the day where another Chaos Fairy deck hits because I just love playing this deck. It's just really cool. You can make synchro lines as well with the tuners in the deck with Plague Spreader Zombie and Herald of Orange Light. You can make the level 8 synchros, you can make level 6 synchros, and you can play your Nami monsters that can special summon themselves from the hand and generate a ton of advantages. It's just a beautiful thing to see in Edison, and then I would like to see Chaos Fairies do well in the next tournament, in the next big tournament in the future. But yeah, this is going to be it for all my favorite decks in Edison, and I really thank you guys for tuning in to know what my favorite decks are and what my reasons are for it. You can probably identify some of the elements of why I like a certain deck, and you can also get thrown off by why I like certain decks, but mostly I'm pretty consistent about why I like certain decks. For my next series for this deck, I'm going to go over my most hated decks in Edison, so stay tuned for that, and yeah, thanks to you for watching and tuning in, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.